They've got questions to answer, but can they deliver? Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risks all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel. Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen, for the first time ever, is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 12 of F1 in Review, the episode, the hour and part 2, where we look back at round 5 of the first ever Miami Grand Prix and also look forwards to the Barcelona Grand Prix, which is coming this weekend. I'm Tom Clabon, I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallager. As always, you can follow myself and Tristan individually on Twitter, as well as the F1 in Review account there. And going on to our first topic now, I believe it's 2 episodes ago we were discussing how Haas's Mick Schumacher, the son of the 7-time world champion, how we've been getting on really in terms of a year and a bit in Formula 1. I think it's fair to say we concluded that the surname meant he was getting an easier ride versus, let's say, your Latifis, your Strolls, and those who hadn't really delivered too much since they've been in the sport. Now, if we rewind to lap 52, I believe, of the Miami Grand Prix, he was very close to redeeming himself, to showing how good he could be, getting himself 2 points, sandwiched between 2 Alpines, and about to secure those 2 points, right? Well, unfortunately not. Things went horribly wrong when Ocon and Vettel got into a scrap with him. Vettel overtook Mick Schumacher. Schumacher then tried to get him back. I believe he's on turn 1 and effectively just launched himself in to the Aston Martin car. Both then DNF'd, 0 points for Mick Schumacher, and then he uttered the famous words, "That was clearly my corner." And after some extensive research, consultation with fact checkers, we can confirm exclusively here on F1 in Review that claim is not true. He was not indeed the man to get that corner. But in all seriousness, what do we make though of the young German throwing away his first ever potential points in Formula 1? You know, he's got a very good car, as we say. He's now got a teammate that can really take the fight to him and beat him. He's in a position now where you really think if he'd have kept his nose clean and not gone in for that corner that wasn't his, we'd be saying, oh, well done, Mick Schumacher, well done, you're showing your potential. But as I say, that is not to be. What do we make of that? Sort of a one-off mistake or a sign of something more serious, maybe?
Well, it's all our fault, isn't it? Because I think in our chat we said, God, this is going to be a great result for Mick Schumacher. Fantastic result for Mick Schumacher prematurely, and then of course he bins it, which is an absolute shame. I suppose we left last week discussing Alex Albon and a certain Ocon, who I would say they did the right things throughout. They positioned themselves quite well throughout the Grand Prix, and especially Albon has done that now twice for a team that isn't very competitive in that Williams. He's been in the situation where he can bank a couple of points if he's a bit lucky. So he just sort of hangs back and keeps it calm, collective, and then boom, something else happens up the road. You've accidentally found yourself in the points. And I think that's something that makes a driver like Alex Albon stand out to a lot of teams. Because the greatest drivers in the world have the ability to do that. Niki Lauda, for example, with his stint in Ferrari, was great at pushing the car, but also not taking too many risks. Lewis Hamilton, also a very, very clean driver. It knows when to give things up and just to bank the points, bank the win if it in some cases, you know. And unfortunately, Mick, I think he just wanted that extra glory, which is so frustrating for us Mick fans, because we want him just to get some points. Not many. One will do. Just one. Get into the points, and once you're over that threshold, I think things get easier. Do you remember we were waiting for George Russell to get points for absolutely ages, and then once one came, they all sort of flooded in. So I think that Mick just needs to get over that hump. And at the moment, he's not in a position to take risks to try and get that, like, I don't know, extra run up the ladder. He's already got it by the fact that, you know, he is Mick Schumacher. He is Schumacher's heir to the Ferrari lineage, if you'd like. And I don't think he needs to prove himself other than just, you know, being a good driver. So I feel like what happened at the Miami Grand Prix was he wanted to prove himself as the next Michael Schumacher, you know, following in his father's, well, tremendously large footsteps, and ended up putting it into a wall. So that's a problem. What they do about that, I'm not totally sure. I think they need to say to him, you know, if you're in the points next time, we want you to run a nice, smooth race. You don't think you can make the corner? Don't make it. You know, that sort of mentality. If you don't need to take a risk, don't take a risk. It's not like he was going from like 11th to 10th, and this was his, you know, vital moment for, I don't know, his own little world championship. It wasn't. It was lap 52 of a Miami Grand Prix, a race in which he should have just coasted to the end and claimed those points. And we would have all been sitting here going, the spell is over. That's it. Fantastic. Because bear in mind, the podcast before the Miami Grand Prix, we were all sitting here going, oh, I can't believe Mick's not got any points. So I thought I was going to be eating my words and feeling all embarrassed at our predictions that Mick wouldn't get some points for a bit longer. We're going to come into, going to be proven wrong. But alas, unfortunately, we were proved right. So yes, Mick, if you're listening, hello. Secondly, just sit back, take those points. Don't take a risk. Picture yourself in a Williams. Think, what would the Williams team do? Not take risks. That's the answer.
You say the Williams team wouldn't risk it, but I was trying to think of a comparable example to Mick's situation. And hear me out. George Russell in his early Williams years, because he had chances to score points. And just from memory, if you think of that time at Imola in 2020 where he was in the points and he crashed out under a safety car. Oh, yeah, Imola 2021 where he crashed with Bottas in that infamous incident. Just a couple of times where George Russell had the chance for points. Mugello, I think it was, in 2020 where it was a pretty attritional race and he had a pace advantage over the Ferraris and the Alfa Romeos, but he couldn't quite put off the points finish. There are similarities with that, I think. The thing is, George Russell had showed promise, and we were all kind of like, it's not great from him, but, you know, it's coming. The first points are coming. The potential's there. Clearly, he's very, very good. I mean, he was a back-to-back F3 and F2 champion, after all. I mentioned this on the podcast a few weeks ago about Mick Schumacher's peculiar record in junior formulae on the road up to Formula One, because he has a very interesting record of being able to not have an amazing first year, but then ace it second year. So Formula 4, 10th in year 1, 2nd in year 2. Italian Formula 3, 12th in year 1, 1st in year 2. Formula 2, 12th in year 1, 1st in year 2. So he keeps on delivering the goods in year 2. Now, clearly F1's a different beast. He's not in a championship or a title or a race-winning car, but you'd still expect him to be doing the business a bit. Kevin Magnussen comes straight back in, experienced driver, yes, I'll give you that, knows the team well, but he's had a year out of the sport. He had about, not even exaggerating, about 3 working days to get used to the Haas car before he had to rock up in Bahrain and drive it at the first practice session. Mick Schumacher should be doing better. He just should. This race was an absolutely perfect opportunity for him to bag those first points, because it was a little bit of a chaotic race, but he had a decent car. Faster cars who qualified ahead of him in Gasly and Norris had crashed out, and they weren't there as a threat. He'd managed to get himself ahead of some other faster cars like Fernando Alonso, Yuki Tsunoda, Daniel Ricciardo, Esteban Ocon was there and thereabouts, and he finished in the points in the end. He was ahead of Alex Albon by the time he crashed out, or had the collision, we should say. And he just, I'm sorry, he has to do better. It just makes it a whole lot worse that it was his Formula One dad who he punted off the track. Poor Sebastian Vettel, being on the receiving end. And I thought Vettel was very diplomatic after the race about it, because if I was him, I'd be absolutely fuming, because it was Vettel's corner. Schumacher's gone in for a lunge. Poor Mick on the radio is sort of, he's crashed into him, and then the voice tone which he's portraying as he's realised his mistake is one of a small child who's lost their favourite football in the back garden, or lost their favourite toy underneath mounds of clothes in the cupboard. He just sounded devastated. He was absolutely devastated. And as much as the temptation of people to be like, "Oh, don't worry, Mick, it's okay, sweetheart, it's okay, it's all right, you'll get those first points." What if he never gets those first points? No, I'm joking. I'm sure he will, but at the same time,
that's what Mick's in her mind's going.
Yeah,
get them.
But at the same time, Formula One is ruthless, and to be honest, based on his name and his Ferrari affiliation, he is arguably the safest of those drivers that we consider out of the elite or out of the midfield. The ones, i.e. the rookies, or the ones who we maybe don't rate as highly. Schumacher, I'd say, is top of that pile because of other factors too, and also because he did put up a good performance in that Haas in year one. But as is now being uncovered, benchmark in year one said Mr. Mazepin was very low. Benchmark in year two, Mr. Magnussen, is quite a bit higher. At the moment, he's not really matching up to it. So he has to step it up, to be honest with you. But at the same time, he has the car, and you like to think, if I go full circle and back to that George Russell comparison, Russell in that Williams car in 2020, for example, there wasn't a fast car, and you didn't feel he'd get around the points that often. So when he missed out on an opportunity, you felt you'd feel like he'd be reeling a bit, because it would be a real opportunity. But Schumacher's been in and around the points in, maybe 3 or 4 out of the 5 races. So it's just a case of finishing the job, really. So I'm sure it will come, but I mean, for his sake, it needs to be in Barcelona. It can't be in Canada or Silverstone that he gets those points. He needs to get them now, ASAP.
Yeah, I fear this is a mentality issue versus a talent issue. We know how well he's done in the Formulas below in Formula 2 and 3, as we're saying. You can't win it and be a bad driver. That's simply not possible, I'd argue. But then again, not every F2 winner does very well in Formula 1. And the more that Mick Schumacher continues to race and not do very well, the more I compare him maybe to Stoffel Van Dorn, who came into the sport, so many bells and whistles attached to him. He was meant to be, the next big thing for McLaren, and then we look at his final season in 2018, scores points 4 times, gets kicked out. So you wonder to yourself, is history repeating itself? Have we overhyped Mick Schumacher owing to A, his record, and B, his name? And that's, not really helping the situation, because I think it's, it's obvious in any part of life, really. When you overthink something and when you have to wait for something, you can't get something, and, you screw something up and, you just don't get it, then, fear attaches itself to it, doesn't it? So I fear that he's very much in the trenches when it comes to that, and we've seen how badly that can affect drivers, previously. Not only your Gaslys and your Albons in the sort of Red Bull circus of the second seat, as was well documented in Drive to Survive, but Grosjean as well, when he was in his last few years at Haas, he had a shocking run of form where, he crashed under the safety car at Baku, I believe. We're now seeing it with Ricciardo, where he's not really scoring many points. I think he's only scored points once so far out of the first 5 races, and he didn't really have a very good season last time out when he was a debutant for McLaren. So I think this is what we're seeing. We're seeing a mentality issue, and the question is, can Mick Schumacher overcome it? Well, he's 24 years old, I believe. He's a young man, so there is time on his side. He also has the tools, as we say. I don't think Haas is nearly as good as we thought it would be after the first Bahrain race, but it's still very competitive. I think it's better, per se, than the AlphaTauri. It can definitely give the Alfa Romeo run for its money, but then again, I'd argue that Bottas is a better driver and in a rich vein of form, really, as well, which makes it even worse for those two. So he's not got that excuse anymore, but the opposition, the critique, and the questions are now starting to build, and it's time for Mick to pull it out of the bag. And I fear that he realised he was in the points, got a bit too panicked, and then it just didn't work out. And I just hope that cycle of fear doesn't repeat itself. But I mean, could you guys see them dumping Schumacher for the next season? Let's say that he has an awful rest of the season, doesn't score any points, no higher than, let's say, 12th or 13th, and Steiner and Gene Haas himself go, well, sorry, kiddo, there's someone else around the corner, Piastri maybe. If Alonso signs again with Alpine, for example, Piastri will be there going, hi guys, I'm free, I'd like to drive a Formula 1 car, and they go, well, let's spin the wheel, let's have a go. What do you think?
I don't think they're going to drop him, because he's only had 1 year in this new era of Formula 1 with that type of car, which seems to be very, very different. So if Angus's analysis of the time it takes Schumacher to get up to speed is correct, then this is year 1, and so he will be kept on for next year, see how he does the end of next year. But there's a term that we use in golf, actually, for this kind of situation. It's steadying the ship. And what we apply there is when, you're having a bad round and each hole is going worse than the last, and then you just have to take it back a notch. Play a safe bogey, then up to the pars, and then see if you can get a birdie after that, rather than trying to attack each hole and getting more and more angry with it. And that's the same thing as Mick's got to do. I feel like at the moment, he's just got to steady the ship. Maybe he's got to get the 11th places, and then the 10th, and then the 9s. And then his moment will come. Once he needs
points. He needs
No,
points,
but he doesn't need points. He just needs to be consistent. Because at the end of the day, if Magnussen's doing a good enough job for the team now, then that gives Schumacher a little bit of headroom to get his head in gear, because this is the problem that Alex Albon had at Red Bull, or Pierre Gasly had at Red Bull. No one gave him the breathing room, or either of them the breathing room, to get themselves in a comfortable position within their own head. They said, why aren't you delivering? Max is getting first places. You're not getting first places. Now you're 7th, you're 9th, you're 13th. You're being lapped. Look at this. And then what happens? It's a downward spiral. You got to give them time, Angus, to steady the ship. Surely he's so young.
You got to give him time. Yeah, I get you that. But also, Formula One's a ruthless sport, and also I would argue it's an interesting comparison with Gasly and Albon, because yes, the gap was wide in all those instances, but that took on a higher stakes because Red Bull was aiming to be fighting Mercedes for wins and podiums, and when you have two drivers up there, you're much more effective. Whilst here, they're not. I feel in the midfield battle, and you're never fighting against a direct rival unless you come to the end of a season. At that point, you're just trying to scramble as many points as you can and trying to get as much of a head start on your rivals as possible. Maybe towards the end of the season, if Haas, for example, are in a battle with Alpha Tauri or Alfa Romeo for 6th or 7th, then they might say, okay, right, we need the both drivers up there to get points. But at the moment, it's just a case of basically hoovering up as many points as they can. But I feel like maybe I've gone from being all nice on Mick to, right, come on Mick, step it up, pal. But I just think it's less of a good look the longer he doesn't get those first points, to be honest.
And the only reason I raised that question is because his current contract with Haas runs out at the end of this year. So technically, Haas would be under no obligation, legal or otherwise, to keep him on. The question then is what happens to him in terms of Ferrari. Do they get rid of Giovinazzi and he becomes the reserve driver then? But is that an upgrade? I suppose you're in a bigger camp, but you're not driving, are you? And as we saw, in many cases, once you get out of one of the two seats, it's then a lot harder to get back in. And I mean, maybe I'm being unfair by saying this, but Guan Yu Zhou's already scored points, and he's only had 5 races. And I realise that Schumacher got 11th in Bahrain, and in another universe, he'd have been 10th. Guan Yu Zhou be 11th, would be going, oh, for God's sake, Joe, just go and get some points, man. But the facts are the facts as they are, and there's bigger questions now, I think, for Schumacher to answer. And I think that's largely because of his name as well, because it's very much come as a gift in many ways of, oh, he's Michael Schumacher's son. No doubt it'll be very good. But then again, when you're compared to him and Ralph, and they go, well, you're a Schumacher, why can't you get us some points? arguably the coin spins and then the more negative aspects come out of it. To his advantage, they are of course only 5 races into a blockbuster season. There's so much time for him to go and get it back, but I think it's fair to go and say that he's not really had an improved start as many other drivers have had, notably when you consider that Zhou and Albon, who have come into the sport, and Magnussen, fresh into the sport. I understand new regulations, but they've had a break or not had experience in terms of Formula 1 racing, yet they're outperforming, and which does raise questions.
Yeah, but it's not like Mick wasn't going to get the points. You see, this is, I suppose, the weird thing about what we're analysing here is Mick was on course for points, good points, and steady points, right? And he went and tried to do the extra step, that sort of glory moment, which everyone always wants, but very few can pull off. And that's kind of why it's such an interesting debate about what we do with Mick, because if he hadn't of done that extra step, then he would have been getting points and we would all be sitting here going, congratulations, Mick, that the curse is lifted, right? But what I think my takeaway was he can do it. Well, there you go. He's already done it once. He got to the 3 laps from the end and then he made that mistake. He sure as hell won't do it again. So I don't think it's good to punish someone on their way up just because they made a mistake at the final hurdle. The last push is always the hardest one. And so I think that's where we're at with Mick. If Mick was trundling along at the back, consistently at the back, with no hope of getting up into the points, I think it'd be a different debate. But look, pessimistically, he brings in a lot of sponsorship. Haas just opened up their new merch store, which I'd like to say is quite reasonably priced, Tom. I know you're a Haas fan.
Hey.
So who doesn't want to go on and get a Mick Schumacher t-shirt or hoodie or something? That's one half of it. So no, from that perspective, I don't think they'll get rid of him, especially as Haas could do with the sponsorship money now that their main backer is disappeared. And secondly, he's proved himself that he could do it, which is all we need. They just need that moment of magic. I mean, blimey, if you were really pessimistic, you'd have looked at, let's say, Charles Leclerc last year finishing behind Sainz and then being like, wow, we should drop Leclerc then because he's the inferior driver. Hey, that would have aged like milk. So, in my humble opinion, he will be kept on for sponsorship reasons and because he can do it. And Haas want to be the one promoting, the next Michael Schumacher. Well, pretty much is the next Michael Schumacher, if you'd like. So, yeah, I just don't think they're going to drop him.
Yeah, we could be all day in terms of this topic, so we might as well move on to topic 2, this being Mercedes, the current Constructors' champions, if you can believe that. Not a brilliant qualifying, it's fair to say, in terms of Russell qualifying 12th, Hamilton 6th. But as has been the case seemingly in every race, they've pulled it out the bag. George Russell is the only driver on the grid, fun fact, to finish in the top 5 every single race, granted only 5. And Hamilton redeemed himself after a poor start, shall we say, got himself back up there and was overtaken by George Russell. George Russell, of course, being aided significantly by the overcut that he deployed rather successfully after his friend Lando Norris crashed or was taken out, shall we say. And the Bottas mistake of the death also helped, gifting, of course, more points to Mercedes. But still, there remains problems, doesn't there, in terms of how Mercedes understand their car and how they can get the best out of it. They did so well in practice. We thought to ourselves, are Mercedes quote-unquote back? Have they solved the porpoising issues? But the performance drop-off really between Friday and Sunday has got Toto Wolff and everyone talking, really. He says they're still in no man's land. They haven't been in this situation before, don't we know it? And drivers are understandably not too happy. So what do we make, though, of Mercedes after 5 races? Because if we're looking at it from a sort of granular perspective of race to race and you compare them to 2021, you say, well, they're nowhere near where they were. They've dropped off clearly. It's been a bit of a failure of a season. But on the more positive side, on their broad brush situation here, they're still 3rd in the Constructors' Championship. They've got drivers scoring points on all occasions bar 1, and don't remember that with Lewis Hamilton. So you think to yourselves, as we say many a time in these episodes of F1 in Review, if they can solve the issues, it's all hunky-dory. They're back up there with Red Bull, with Ferrari. They're back up there potentially getting a podium or two, and they could salvage something and have a drop-off from last season, but still a rather respectable season. But of course, if the situation continues where they still don't know the granular details of the car and how to get the best out of them, you go, is this the beginning of the end of Mercedes being a powerhouse in its current form in terms of Formula One if they're just so behind two big teams? But what do you guys think?
I think Mercedes, again, I don't know, because it was such a weird weekend for them. Because if we cast our mind back, again, it seems ages, but those practice sessions, they aced it. They were top of the charts. You had Charles Leclerc saying, well, we didn't expect Mercedes to be up top. It looked like they might have found something, and you thought, right, this is it. 3-team title battle. Here we go. This is what we wanted. And then qualifying happened, and we're back to reality. So Hamilton 6th, behind Bottas again. It makes you chuckle every time that happens. I'm sure it makes Valtteri Bottas more than chuckle. George Russell down in 12th. Very tight Q2, admittedly, but still not getting through to Q3. Not great, realistically. The race, I think they both have to have credit for getting it back to where it could be. Hamilton was running 5th for most of the race, and then Russell, towards the end, came in, got lucky with the safety car, admittedly. But at the same time, you could also argue, I remember him being on the radio to his engineers, saying, let's stay out here for a bit, hold out, there might be a safety car. And this was around about lap 40, when he'd already spent 40 laps on his hard tyres. And I know they're hard tyres, but still, that's a long time to preserve one set of tyres. And his call was correct, so fair play to him for judging that as well as he did. And it meant that it ended up being a semi-successful race for Mercedes in the end. 18 points, it's about the maximum they can get these days, with Red Bull and Ferrari being far ahead. And yeah, George Russell once again, top 5 finishes in every single race so far this season. And I know he's in a Mercedes now, but considering before this season he'd only ever finished in the top 5 once, that's still impressive assimilation to come in and be at that high level straight away. Lewis Hamilton, meanwhile, I mean, there was more focus on what his off-track, I was about to say misdemeanors, but he's done nothing wrong, realistically. We're talking about the jewellery situation, for those of you who aren't aware. So the FIA clamping down on jewellery in the on drivers, and Hamilton taking the absolute mick by coming to the press conference with 3 watches, 5 gold chains, and about 8 or 9 rings on his fingers.
Just wish you could pull that off, Angus. That's what it is.
Would never try, mate. Would never try. But yeah, overall, they probably squeezed the pip of the orange, Mercedes, in terms of what they could have got. And they're talking about upgrades. I believe, from what I remember, there's another upgrade coming in Spain. So we'll have to see how that goes. But at the moment, they're not... I want to use the phrase stuck in a mire, but they're not really, because if you're getting the points that they are, so they got 95 points across 5 races. 19 points a weekend ain't bad. But just compared to the high standards we expected them, when you win 7 Constructors' Championships in a row, 8 in a row, 2014, 2021, every year, to then go to what they're at this year, it is a letdown. And I say this again, I said it right at the start of the season, if any team can come back and upgrade and recover, it's Mercedes. Come on, Mercedes, step it up. My words are sounding incorrect at the moment. But yeah... I don't know. Such a weird one, because they're again in this no man's land where they're 50 plus points behind Red Bull and about 50 points ahead of McLaren. So yeah, it's a weird situation they're in. Weird situation for them, at least.
Supposedly, Toto Wolff has announced earlier this week that they found an easy way out of their situation. I wish I had something more pithy to say than that about it, really. But I don't know whether or not he's just, oh yeah, we found a way, because they're not. He said they're not catapulting it in and bringing it in yet. I don't know why they wouldn't.
Well, if it's that easy, why'd they not find it out in testing, mate?
I guess the answer to that is because the porpoising didn't come out properly in testing, because the way that they model they have to use like models and stuff, and they can't actually run the full car in like the wind tunnel, so they didn't see it coming, as lots of teams didn't. I think you've done a good analysis in terms of where Mercedes are at, to be honest, Angus. So I don't want to just repeat what you've said. At the end of the day, we're going to Barcelona next. And if you'd like, I think it's a great time for Mercedes to assess whether or not their car has a future. Because it all started in Barcelona. If you think about it, at the very, very beginning of the seasons, with all the cameras switched off and we weren't supposed to see what was going on. It all started in Barcelona, and Mercedes had a radically different car design. So they're now coming back to Barcelona with, ironically, a radically different car design to the one that they originally rolled out for the pre-season testing. But this one looks really difficult to drive, and it's time to assess, really, whether or not the mentality behind the Mercedes car is the right one, because the problem they've got at the moment is they've gone with a design where you maximize the floor. And because of that, because they're trying to get that downforce to be created through the floor only, then the porpoising starts at a much lower speed, which is what the problems have been for them. That's why they can't get up to speed, because they've got this big damage then coming in from the sheer number of impacts that the car has on the ground, because they get porpoising much lower speeds, so more porpoising than other teams. So given that we're going to Barcelona, and given that Toto Wolff has now said, "Oh well, we've got the the solution, the key to our success is round the corner," then I think this will be a make or break weekend, really, because if it doesn't work for them this year, then I can't see them bringing in another, the same style of car next year. So I think it's just unfortunate, really, that Mercedes has ended up in a situation where they probably do, and I'm sure they do, have a fantastic car on paper, but they just can't get it to work within the scope of the regulations. And if this was 1975 or 1980s, they would have come out with some sort of radical, like, aero change or something like that would allow them to make it work. Maybe they'd fit some new type of spring dampening system to it, or active suspension. Unfortunately, we are in the age of Formula One where things are very, very restrictive. You don't get the fan car, for example, anymore, which is a real shame, to be honest. Or the Tyrrell six-wheeler. I mean, imagine if Mercedes turned up to Barcelona and was like, "Oh, by the way, guys, the solution to our problem is adding 2 more wheels to the car." Like, that would be absolutely ridiculous. And it's a real shame we don't have that anymore. So I think at the end of the day, they're going to have to turn up to Barcelona, see how they're doing, and go, right, we're getting near the summer break. We're going to have to either scrap this design or bring in those good upgrades. So, and I hope it's the latter option. I hope they bring in the upgrades, to be honest. But they're doing pretty well for a team that I suppose is having to make do and mend every single weekend.
It's more than solid foundations for sure. Now, I question when Toto Wolff says they know the solution to the problem, whether that means that A, as he'd probably hope and Mercedes fans and drivers would hope, that it's going to turn them into a rocket ship Ferrari Red Bull powertrain car. But I hazard a guess and think that perhaps they've solved an issue in terms of making it really good at street circuits or really good at power circuits. So the question is, with 2 street circuits coming up and a hybrid of the 2 after, in Baku followed by an out-and-out power circuit in Canada, the next 4 races, I think, are really key to seeing where Mercedes' strengths will lie, if they have any strengths moving forwards. Because if they do a lot better than they've previously done at Barcelona, get themselves, let's say, 2 or 1 drivers comfortably on the podium, give a run for their money when it comes to Ferrari, and Red Bull, you go, oh, okay, street circuits then, that's obviously where they're going to be really good. Roll on Hungary if you're a fan of Mercedes, roll on Singapore, it's going to be a fantastic time. But then again, if there's no improvement, and once again we see them sort of stuttering, spluttering it, somehow getting themselves up to, I don't know, 5th and 6th, then you go, okay, we'll have to go and wait till Baku. But then if nothing comes at Baku or nothing comes at Canada, you go, well, the upgrades aren't coming then. And we've been told so many times by the sort of Mercedes, Hamilton, Russell fan club, oh, they're just sandbagging. They will get up there. They will. And you should never rule them out, the constructors. Never, never, never. Well, I think really the next 4 races are make or break, really, because yes, you'll be 9 races into a rather long season, in excess of 20 races, but you're then asking a team to essentially pull a rabbit out of the hat in the summer, work night and day for the break there, and just bring the car back from 2021, let it adhere to the new regulations, and just hope that you can just get a 1-2 for the rest of the season. So eyes on Mercedes, I think, is my underlying point or thought over the next 4 races. A long time to keep your eyes on Mercedes, granted, but I think that's where we'll see, or that period is where we'll see where Mercedes really are come the end of the season, because I think there's no chance in my view, he says, of McLaren catching Mercedes. It's whether Mercedes can pull themselves closer to first and second Ferrari and Red Bull, or, dare I say, overtake it, which I think is somewhat unlikely at this current point. But we know how well my comments tend to age, so I'll say at the moment.
Surely it's over for Mercedes at the moment.
For the constructors, 100%.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
100%.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's just
I can't see them clawing back the points. That's the problem. And then where does that leave them? You know, I suppose that is the ideal scenario for Mercedes, that they, by the end of the season, perfect this year's car. Because to me that sounds like a real problem though going forward, because that's like a team like Williams, for example, will do that. By the end of the season, they'll perfect their, turd of a car, and then the next series occurs, the next year occurs, and they're all the way at the back again. Mercedes' dominance was fueled by the fact that they were so far ahead of the other teams, into that 2014 period, that by the time 2020 came up, that they had a massive run of successes culminating that final 2020 year. And obviously we know in 2021 that Lewis Hamilton wouldn't win the World Championship, but Mercedes would still take the constructors. Surely at the moment, because they're on the back foot, they're just going to keep being on the back foot for a while longer, maybe years longer.
I mean, it's distinctly possible. I'd say if I was Mercedes at this point, the best I'd be hoping for is to solve the problems they have and to fully understand the car, which you'd have thought is, your sort of basic gravy when it comes to Mercedes at least. But they've got to really be thinking we could maybe, if we really pull our act together and all the upgrades go really well, we could, in inverted commas, nab second. And I think then that's probably the best they can hope for. And to use a sort of footballing analogy, it's like getting stacked 5 goals in the first half and then somehow clawing it back to 5-4 and going, well, we ran them really close, so this hasn't been a bad season, so look at the score. But in reality, it's got to be more about a learning process, I think, versus anything else, because I suppose we have seen, through the years in Formula 1, the big teams can fluctuate while the rules stay the same. Ferrari, for example, went from doing splendidly well to, doing awfully in terms of, I believe it's the 2020 season. Granted, that was somehow influenced, or somewhat influenced, should I say, by the penalty and the fine they got for the, essentially illegal car they have. But there is some latitude, I'd say, between the top 3. But I feel that Mercedes need to make sure they are truly in that top 3 versus being in, third place still, but outside of the bubble of the 2. So keeping up with the top 2 and hopefully overtaking second place, whoever that may be, has to be the aim now, which I didn't think I'd be saying after the culmination of last season. Well, the fun just keeps on coming in this early part of the F1 2022 calendar, doesn't it? A hop, skip and a jump from the great Miami Grand Prix we had there to Spain, of course, a circuit which there were a few similarities I pointed at last race, and I thought, it could be to Miami's advantage. We could have a rather good race there. Obviously, fact checkers can say with some confidence we did not, regardless of the headline saying thrilling Grand Prix. But the only reason we can look back at last season with some hope is the fact that there was actually a rather tight race in some capacity between 2 teams. It culminated in Hamilton in first, Max in second, Bottas third, Leclerc in 4th and Perez in 5th. We know they changed to turn 10 in 2021. No new changes coming this season, unfortunately. What do we make of Spain? Do we think Spain can redeem itself? I personally think it's a rather boring Grand Prix and have set the bar very low in my own personal expectations, as I have with the Grand Prix that follows it, Monaco. But what do you guys think? Can Spain really produce a decent race, or was last year with the semi-fight we got as good as it's really going to get at that Grand Prix or circuit?
Blimey. Miami, then we've got Barcelona, and then we've got Monaco.
Hey, treated.
I know, and I know that lots of people out there are going to be like, did you just add Monaco to your sighing? Yes, I did, because it's a boring race as well, spoiler alert. Yeah, although the Monaco historic Grand Prix was on Sunday, I don't know if you saw that Charles Leclerc, unfortunately, the curse of him at Monaco, it occurred again in Niki Lauda's Ferrari, and he crashed it, which I think was pretty darn devastating for him. He said he had a brake failure, which I'm not surprised, given those cars are effectively go-karts on steroids, which is a real shame. I don't want to talk about Barcelona, by the way. I'm sidetracking the old Barcelona issue. So that was an interesting development on Sunday, that historic Grand Prix. Great show, by the way. If you haven't seen it, it's one of the very, Formula One-esque things you can watch pretty much free. So if you go onto YouTube, it should be there. I think Goodwood was streaming it, and loads of people had it online, which is really nice. It'd be nice if more Grand Prix, real Grand Prix, were perhaps free. Maybe the Barcelona one could be free because no one wants to go watch it, which is a real shame, really, because the city of Barcelona is absolutely fantastic. If you've never been, I would highly recommend going. Unfortunately, it's got that track attached to it, which was supposed to be improved last year. They made a couple of upgrades to it. Upgrades are in inverted commas there, because they weren't really all that effective, I don't think. Do you think they were effective? What do you think?
No, absolutely not.
No. And actually, what made it exciting wasn't the track at all. It was the fact that we had that chase, didn't we, between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, and Lewis ended up pipping Max to the post at the end there, which was great. So, if you listen back to the podcast last year, you will hear us going, wow, we had an exciting Barcelona Grand Prix, but I feel like that was kind of a unicorn race, which is a bit of a shame, really. It's a bit like, I suppose, to think about Monaco, it was a bit like when Daniel Ricciardo in Red Bull, his electrical power unit failed, with Sebastian Vettel chasing him down in the Ferrari, and so that was a nail-biting end to the Monaco Grand Prix. But Ricciardo ended up winning, spoiler alert, because no one can overtake in Monaco. So even with 80 horsepower down, he survived to take the win. And unfortunately, though, in Barcelona, Max couldn't stop Lewis getting past, because it is a decent track in terms of like its size, but it's just boring. And the reason it's boring is because it's a pretty bog standard Tilke track. It's got those sort of fixed radius corners attached to it, so there is only one line you drive to it around that corner, and then it's got the fast straight where the DRS will allow you to get past, and then there's no real, I don't want to say there's no skill involved, because I think that's disingenuous and doing a disservice to Formula One drivers, but if there was a track where the drivers could kind of just coast and relax, it would kind of be sort of Barcelona. It's no Suzuka or Singapore, for example, which are brilliant. So I'm not necessarily looking forward to it, I must admit. But if you fancy watching some bizarre Formula One action that isn't, and you get a bit bored during the Barcelona race, watch Sebastian Vettel on BBC Question Time, which he was on Thursday. He made a surprise appearance there, so that's really interesting. And he talks about British politics, which we're not going to talk about on this show because that's contentious. Or if you haven't watched Eurovision yet, that's also, I'm sure, on demand in your local streaming countries. And the United Kingdom didn't come last, which
far from it.
Amazing. Did you guys watch it?
No, absolutely not.
Oh yeah, of course.
Angus
It got
not a
to the
fan,
point. It got to the point with the jury votes where we got so many points so early that we were getting like 1 or 2 points in Moldova, Latvia. That may be wrong, but from some countries, I was like, "Oh, how dare you! That's really disrespectful."
Bear in mind we
Sam
got
Ryder.
none
Only
last
giving
year.
him to 2 points. Exactly. Granted, we hardly get into the double figures. Was some coup indeed. But I've just remembered actually. I'm not too sure why Eurovision has sparked my mind, but if I'm not mistaken, didn't Maldonado win at the Spanish Grand Prix in 2012?
Yes.
Ah, there we go.
How's that come from
Maybe
Eurovision?
another unicorn is due.
He's talking about like surprise.
Oh, like surprise miracles.
Exactly.
So Mick Schumacher to win the Spanish Grand Prix next Sunday. Okay,
That would
Imagine.
be absolutely nuts. I mean, for the UK to get 10 points was amazing. The fact that we got 12 points from France was, well, we were, no, because I was at a party and we were just going nuts. People started yelling "Vive la France," which I thought was very funny, and lots of great things to watch at the moment. But the Barcelona Grand Prix, it might well be a bit of a snooze fest, unfortunately.
So now I'm sitting in a situation in this podcast where I'm talking about two things which I absolutely detest. One being Eurovision, one being the Spanish Grand Prix. Okay, so now which is worse? I'm trying to give myself some optimism. I'm looking at the weather forecast for Barcelona. Nope, it's sunny as always, so no chance of rain. That's one thing which won't happen. The track's been updated last year. Did it make a difference? In a word, no. Is the title battle at least exciting, which should provide a good backdrop to the race? Yes, and that happened last year. We had two drivers at the top of their game in Verstappen and Hamilton, and that definitely made for a more interesting race than had been seen in previous years. So that is something positive. You can really hear me trying to emphasise the bright side here. Anything else? I mean, the Spanish fans will be out in force for Carlos Sainz and Fernando Alonso, so I'm sure it'll be a great atmosphere. Possibly will be the first, I think, because last year's race was... This race usually falls around my birthday every year. It was around about mid-May, and I like to think that the race hadn't yet had fans allowed back because the pandemic was still in like that stage of the pandemic, you know. So I don't know if we had a full Spanish Grand Prix last year. So maybe this year will be the first Grand Prix in Spain in 3 years with a full grandstand, which should be nice, I reckon. Not nice for the Spanish people, viewers who are at the race, because it'll be boring. But anyway, once in a lifetime experience. Anything else? It's up there with one of the dullest races of the season, honestly. And I'm not selling it to any of our listeners, am I? But at the same time, it's probably up there with Monaco. I hate saying that because I think Monaco is brilliant, the track and everything. But it's just... There's not much to look forward to with this race. You never know. There might be an anomaly. There might be a race which really stands out. There might be safety cars, overtaking. Maybe, you know, the new regulations, we forget they're new. They're still new because we've got used to them now, but the regulations allowing cars to follow more closely, maybe they'll have an effect. You like to think Spain's the type of circuit which these regulations were designed for. It's a circuit which does not encourage overtaking, really, or has not produced good races with overtaking in the past. So maybe we'll see a positive effect. Maybe the racing will be better. I feel like it made a difference in Australia. It made a bit of a difference in Imola. So maybe it'll make a bit of a difference in Spain, which again is notoriously known for being difficult to overtake at. So, in summary, not many positives to look forward to for this race. There are a few, but we'll just have to see how it goes, I guess. I reckon the Formula 2 might be a better watch, to be honest. That's always tends to be a good watch, but we can hope for the Formula 1. I think I'm not, to be honest, I say that, I think I'm not even going to be watching it. I think I'm on a train around that time the race is happening, or I'll be around London. But if I miss an absolute perler of a race, I'm sure I'll regret it. But will I miss a perler? Realistically, I don't think so.
The one positive to take really from Spain, I think, is that it will end. It will end.
What, the country or the Grand Prix? Which part?
I'll stick for the Grand Prix for now, shall I?
Oh, blimey. Yeah, it's a shame. It's a real shame that we sit here and we joke about how it's the one of the more boring race of the season, because it would be nice if it wasn't. And I don't know. I just think where could we go instead? What could we do to inject a bit more fun into the season if we removed it? Because I believe, last year or maybe the year before on this podcast, I think we said that why don't you keep Barcelona as the testing track? Keep it on in that format. Maybe keep it as a reserve, and then go somewhere else instead. Because if there's one thing that we've seen through the pandemic and that silly season of 2020, there is so many good tracks out there that I'm sure we'd love to see instead. It pops to my mind, like Mugello was good. And Turkey, fantastic, with our iconic Turn 8. There are other fantastic tracks to be seen. And, for the laugh, we could always chuck them around Snetterton, right, which is teeny tiny, just to see how they do. Or Brands Hatch, which, if you don't know, they're like little UK tracks, part of the Formula 4 season here. So I jest, but we could send them to different tracks and not stick them around Barcelona, where we know kind of how they're going to perform because of the pre-season testing. Granted that this year's going to be different, isn't it? Because no one turned up to Barcelona pre-season testing with the car that they were going to be actually running. Mercedes, jumps out there, or even sort of Ferrari and Red Bull. Their testing later on didn't look anything like the cars in Barcelona. But we're stuck with it, which is a bit of a shame, because it would just be sod's law, wouldn't it? That of all the, I suppose, historic European tracks or European tracks we're used to, Spa would end up going, or Monza would end up going, and we'd be left with Monaco, because that will never go, Barcelona, which would be a big shame, really, because we don't need Barcelona. We could have a different track and it would be brilliant. But I think even with that, we still have to sit here and do our predictions, don't we? Because this wouldn't be a preview episode without that sort of final putting your neck out and putting your name on the line, if you'd like. Who do you think is going to do well at the Barcelona Grand Prix?
I would say, not Mick Schumacher. I'm going to say the wait for points is going to go on. And I also think, I don't like predicting people to have a stinker, but I'm going with it now. I also think that I'm going to say that George Russell's going to have his first poor race of the season. Not poor as in like terrible, but just poor in comparison to the high standards he's set already. Maybe he has a low key qualifying, doesn't do as well. Maybe he comes home in like 8th or 9th. Are we saying who does well? Are we predicting the winner and the podium, or what would you prefer?
Yeah,
it can be whatever you want it to be, Angus.
But also not necessarily the winner, but in terms of like maybe the midfield teams, you might.
I think, okay, if we had two drivers to do well, I think Fernando Alonso is going to do well. I think he's had a year with a couple of mistakes, a bit of bad luck, but he has been driving well overall. But I think he's going to be driven, have that extra support from the home crowd, and I think he's going to do really well. And I also think that I won't pick the second Spanish driver. I think that Kevin Magnussen is going to do... No, I'm taking that back. I think Pierre Gasly is going to do really well. I think he is overdue a good result. I feel like he's been driving... Last year he was solid in both quali and the race, but I feel like he's been more solid in quali this year with a bit of bad luck in the race. But also, for example, in Miami with his being punted off by Fernando Alonso, then admittedly not looking where Lando Norris was going. But I think that Gasly will have a good one. So I think Gasly and Alonso to have a good one. And I'm saying George Russell and Mick Schumacher to have less good weekends.
Interesting. I just have a funny feeling. I don't know why, but I feel like Carlos Sainz is going to win this race.
That is a bold prediction for Spain. Any reasoning?
Race.
I just feel that he's got over that sort of dip in form via the two retirements. I feel that he's got himself back on the horse, so to speak. He was quite unlucky, I think, really, in Miami. He did everything right in terms of clean racing with Max, but Max just got the better of him, and I feel he's due, really, a rather good race and a win. I just feel that the cards are going to fall very much in his favour for once. I feel we're due another Max Verstappen retirement, I feel we're due another one. I don't think it's due to reliability. I think there's going to be a bit of a prang, a bit of a crash, a bit of a safety car. So that's one for good, one for bad. I think it's going to be another rotten weekend for Gasly. He's in a bit of a dip in form currently, isn't he, in terms of the retirement last one, the 12th, before the retirement. Well, I suppose if you go all the way back to Bahrain, it's not been a great season. I don't think it's going to carry on. In terms of driver that's going to do well, I think his teammate Tsunoda is due a good one, because he had the bad luck of not starting in Saudi, got 8th and 7th, so far this season. He's starting to get to grips with the car, quietly, slowly, sort of under the radar. So yeah, those are my predictions as such, but nice and vague, the last
yeah, that's interesting because you both not said Lewis Hamilton. And Hamilton traditionally does very well at Barcelona. It's a track that he's very, very confident at. Unfortunately, he has had a couple of collisions, most notably with a certain Nico Rosberg. Never forget that particular race, which ended up allowing Max Verstappen, if my memory serves me correctly, to win his Grand Prix in the debut race for Red Bull. I'm looking at Angus really because he usually is the oracle of those niche knowledge.
2016, correct.
Good. I knew you would know because I'm digging this out from my brain, but I know you have a knack of remembering that needless knowledge. So I think Hamilton's really good here. I think this is one of his tracks that he has in his bank, that he knows how to do very well at, and so I think he's going to beat Russell here. I say that now, and of course we're going to be like, "Oh, you predict Hamilton to do well," but I we know I think he is very good at it, and I think if I go from the statistics, he looks like he's going to be strong, and I think he's going to make that bounce back, especially if Mercedes bring those upgrades and get the porpoising under control. I don't see any reason why he won't do very well here. Of course, we've got the safe bets right between Leclerc and Verstappen. I think Verstappen's going to, out of the two, I think Verstappen might take the win because he's also very good here, and I think Leclerc's going to be still. His head's not going to be in the right place after his unfortunate event in Monaco. I think it's going to shaken him a bit. So maybe you're right. Maybe this is the moment for a certain Carlos Sainz to hunt him down and take that victory finally over Leclerc for the first time this season. I really hope that Angus, you're incorrect and that Schumacher does really well. I'd like him to do well, at least get 1 point, because then that would match Zhou Guanyu's current position, and then I can say, ha ha ha, I told you so. So that would be good. And unfortunately, I think we're going to have the same old. I think Latifi's going to cause some sort of safety car. I don't think Stroll's going to do very well because the Aston Martin isn't particularly good, although they say they're bringing upgrades. And I really hope Sebastian Vettel does well. Although if he doesn't and he leaves his Formula One career behind him, I'm sure he's got a bright future as a UK political pundit. I'm sure we'll welcome him with open arms to that new genre that he's found himself in, new genre of entertainment, if you'd like. So yeah, I think we're going to get kind of the usual suspects, but I think a surprise not very good for us will be Lando Norris.
And it seems that's all we have time for in terms of episode 12 of F1 in Review. Thank you very much for tuning in, be that via your preferred podcast provider, or whether you're listening via River Radio, be that live or via the Listen Back feature. You can follow myself, Tristan and F1 in Review on Twitter. The handle for F1 in Review is just like that. All one word, no spaces, no hyphens, no nothing, as it was. Now we look forward, he says, checking his notes to round 6 of this season to Spain. That's next on the calendar. In terms of qualifying, that's at 3 p.m. on Saturday in terms of British summertime, whether you're watching in the UK that is, and then the race is an hour earlier and a day later, that being 2 p.m. Sunday, and that's once again British summer time. So when we return next week, we're going to be unpacking a rather exciting weekend of F1 action, no doubt, and also discussing what comes up between now and then in terms of wider topics of Formula 1, being that the next few races, the end of the season, next season, whenever the gods of Formula 1, Liberty Media and co decide to go and drop on our doorstep, all ready for the next episode, episode 13. But as I said, that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to speaking to you this time next week. Goodbye.